Someone asks you the question, not who are you, not where are you from, or perhaps what inspires your life. The question is, and you're familiar with it in advance, so what do? We ask it within the first minute. Because in this culture, the answer is who you are. Who am I in a culture that values me for the work I do when I no longer do it? The Torah saying the law of retirement isn't an ending, it's a promotion from labor to a role of wisdom. The work changes. The worth doesn't move an inch. Freedom doesn't mean the absence of responsibilities. Freedom, in her words and her eyes, means you get to choose your responsibilities. For a lifetime, your work chose your responsibilities for you. Retirement is the first moment. They're entirely yours to choose. This is The Meaning Mindset. I'm Rabbi Ron Li-Paz, your host. Go to a dinner party, any gathering in most countries, certainly many that I'm familiar with, including my own, and you can count the seconds before someone asks you the question, not who are you, not where are you from, or perhaps what inspires your life. The question is, and you're familiar with it in advance, so what do? We ask it within the first minute. Because in this culture, the answer is who you are. Today, I want to talk about what happens when the answer goes away, when the career ends, when the title expires, when the office empties, and the phone stops ringing. That phone stops ringing. Who am I in a culture that values me for the work I do when I no longer do it? It's one of the most painful questions in life for countless people and countless people with whom I've had conversations. We almost never say it out loud, but I want to show you over the next 25 minutes or so that the question isn't simply born of human nature. It's the product of our cultures at one particular moment, and there are older, wiser answers. My own tradition has one, so do others, and so by the end, I want to hand you something better than reassurance. I want to hand you a different definition of a good life, one that no retirement party could take away from you. Every culture has assumptions so deep its people mistake them for reality. Here's one of ours from my culture, certainly from American culture, but it's pervasive. And the idea from American culture is that this culture was built on a Protestant Anglo-Saxon foundation. At the heart of that foundation sits an idea the sociologist Max Weber famously named the Protestant work ethic, very familiar to many of us. That your labor is not just how you pay the bills, it's evidence of your worth, your diligence, your virtue, your productivity is your righteousness. And its early religious form, worldly success, was even read as a hint of divine favor. Over the centuries, the theology faded, but the equation remained. It burned into the culture. What you do to make your living is the primary measure of your value as a human being. And let's give that ethic its due. It built extraordinary things, industries, institutions, this country's prosperity, and probably yours as well. And I'm not here to tear it down at all. But every powerful idea casts a shadow. And here's this one's shadow. If your work is your worth, then the end of your work life is the end of your worth. So we arrive at one of the quietest crises possibly in our lives. Retirement. We paint it as a finish line. Maybe in some cultures it means free time to golf, perhaps grandchildren. Freedom. And for some, it is. But for so many people, the transition into retirement isn't liberation. It's a kind of grief. We may have chosen it. We may have been looking forward to it, even counted down the days on the calendar, but at some point we have to grieve it and realize it's also a loss if we're fully honest with ourselves. The physician who can't say the word retired out loud, the executive who keeps the business cards in the drawer, the men and women who 6 months after the farewell party confess in maybe a quiet conversation, I don't know who I am anymore. I remember a colleague of mine, a rabbi, whom I met after his retirement, and he told me in a quiet panic that he just didn't understand how to be and who to be. He was their rabbi for 30, 40, 50 years. I don't remember. He said, now who am I? Well, there's a name for that place we find ourselves in, and we'll come back to it. But for now, hold this. The disorientation isn't a malfunction, it's a passage. But our culture gives people no map for it because our culture never admitted the passage exists. Of course, people feel lost, unmoored, Think about it. For decade after decade, the culture told them you are what you produce, and they believed it. They organized their days, their pride, their very sense of self around it. And then one Friday afternoon, the culture took the badge back and said, thank you very much for your service. We'll take your parking pass and your office and perhaps your title as well. How could anyone see themselves in a different context now? We spent a lifetime teaching them one language of worth, and then we cancel the only currency it recognized. That's not a personal failure. It's a design flaw, and it comes from believing that human value is something that you earn, which means it's something that you can lose. If value can be earned, it can be repossessed. That's the trap. And to get out of it, we need to examine a tradition that never signed that contract in the first place. Judaism is older than this idea, older by millennia. And on this question, I'll say it plainly, I think it's wiser. Judaism looks at the equation of work and worth and simply refuses to sign on to that contract. Open the Torah and notice something remarkable. It puts astonishingly little emphasis on what anyone does for a living. The Torah never tells us Abraham's job title. It's irrelevant. We meet him not through his resume, but through his character, his actions, his hospitality, his audacity, his willingness to argue with God over the fate of strangers, Sodom, Gomorrah. The tradition's very first claim about human beings comes before any human being had ever done a day's work. That we're made B'Tselem Elohim, the Hebrew term, in the image of our Creator. That means your worth was assigned before your first paycheck, and it survives your last one. It's not compensation, it's a birthright. There are a few birthrights like that one. The great sages of the Talmudic period, they had their day jobs. Hillel was a woodcutter, we're told. Shammai was a builder. Yochanan was a sandal maker. And here's what I love. The tradition barely mentions it. We don't remember Hillel for his lumber. We remember for his patience, his humility, his teachings, his ideas, his argumentation. The job fed the body, the character fed, and continues to feed the generations. And now look at something even more striking. Look at when the Bible's heroes and heroines become interesting. If the Bible were written in Hollywood, by Hollywood, the hero or heroine would be 32 with great hair, with a great suntan and beautiful eyes. Look at the actual casting call of the Torah, of the Bible. Abraham is 75 years old when God calls him to leave everything and begin his journey, leave his father's home, his tent, his people. By the way, think about that idea. At 75, still has that connection to his father's home, his tent, his people. There's a lesson in that for us as well. The age that our culture assigns to the golf cart is when everything begins. Sarah is 90 when she's told she will bear the child who will carry the covenant. And what does she do? She laughs. And God says, watch. Moses is 80 when he stands at the burning bush. 80 when he walks to Pharaoh's palace and demands the freedom of his people. His brother Aaron, standing beside him, is 83. Caleb is 85 when he plants his feet and says, give me this mountain. And Naomi, widowed, bereaved in her later years, becomes the architect of the entire book of Ruth, the grandmother of the royal line of King David. These people aren't deemed interesting enough for inclusion until they are in their later years. The biblical scripture, that story, it barely glances at their youth. That must tell us something universal and timeless. The ancients believed the most consequential chapters of life come late, that age isn't the epilogue, it's the plot. Sit with that for a moment. The formative document of Western civilization systematically casts its leads at 75, 80, 90. The earlier decades, the career-building decades, the decades our culture worships are treated as mere backstory, preparation. The text is almost impatient to get them to old age because that's where the story is. And Judaism doesn't just teach this idea, it practices it every single week. Shabbat. It may be, as you've seen in another episode, or as you might know, it might be the boldest idea that my people ever gave the world. In 1 day in 7, you're commanded to stop producing, not to be tied, not to have your identity formed by what you do for a living. It's not permitted. It's actually commanded that you stop. And here's the point everyone misses. On that day, you're not worthless. The tradition says you're worth more. The mystics say you gain an additional portion of your own soul. The Sabbath, Shabbat, is a weekly rehearsal of a radical truth. You are not your output. Strip away that work, all of it, And what remains is not nothing. What remains is you. Think about what that means. A Jewish practice that practices retirement 52 times a year, precisely so that the self and the job never fully fuse. The culture says you are what you do. Shabbat answers every 7 days, no, you are what remains when the doing stops. Now, does the Torah ever mention retirement? Once, in the book of Numbers, the Levites, the ones who did the heavy physical labor of the sanctuary, they're told that at age 50, they must step back from that labor. But read the next verse. They don't go home. The Torah says they will minister with their brothers. In other words, they will assist, they will guard, they will guide the generation that will carry on what they once carried. I think there's a lot of beauty in that. Do you see what it's saying? The Torah saying the law of retirement isn't an ending, it's a promotion from labor to a role of wisdom, from carrying the sanctuary parts to teaching others how to carry it. The work changes. The worth doesn't move an inch. And this ancient wisdom is being rediscovered in the most modern places. Jim Collins, the great scholar of leadership, the author of Good to Great and several other fantastic books, spent 10 years studying 34 remarkable lives for his new book, What to Make of a Life. And his findings read like a commentary on the book of Numbers. Collins found that nearly every life contains what he calls a cliff, an event that ends life as you know it, a career ending, a loss, a door closing forever. And after that cliff comes what he calls the fog, a period of real disorientation when you don't know who you are anymore. Might sound familiar. That's the retiree a few weeks or months after the farewell party. And here's Collins. He's finding that the fog isn't a failure state. It's a transition state, a legitimate one. It's nearly universal. Among the great lives he studied, the mistake is leaping blindly just to escape the discomfort. The wisdom is taking one visible step and then the next through fog. Katharine Graham, thrust by her husband's death into running the Washington Post with no preparation, spent 7 years finding her footing, one small decision at a time. Then came the Pentagon Papers and Watergate, and she became one of the towering publishers of the century. Her fog wasn't the end of her story. It was a corridor to her greatest chapter. And then Collins offers a warning: never judge a life while it is still in progress. I just want to repeat that so you hear it again. Never judge a life while it is still being lived, including your own. Collins studied Benjamin Franklin, and he found something astonishing. Take every major biography ever written about Franklin and ask, how much of the story is left when Franklin turned 60 years old? 53%, more than half the pages. In an era when people died far younger than they do now, more than half of what history found worth recording about Benjamin Franklin hadn't happened yet at age 60. And in the final years of his life, Franklin was still at it, signing the first petition to the Congress of the United States calling for the abolition of slavery. Another more contemporary figure that's cited in Collins' book, if you know music, contemporary music, rock and roll, Robert Plant. He won more Grammys after Led Zeppelin than during it. Barbara McClintock won her Nobel Prize at 81 for work she simply never stopped doing. The culture says your story peaked at the retirement party. The evidence, ancient and modern, says the verdict is not in as long as you are still breathing. Jim Collins puts it in one line that I want you to keep, to hold on to, maybe to put on the fridge or on your phone. Your capacities expire when you do, so use them. The Torah said it first. The Levite steps back at 50 and then begins to guide other leaders. And lest you think that this is only a Jewish instinct, it isn't. Walk east. And the world's other old civilization, one of them keeps disagreeing with us in the same direction. Classical Hindu tradition maps a life in 4 stages. The ashramas, first the student, then the householder, the decade of career, of family building, and then around the age our culture calls winding down. The tradition doesn't shrink your life, it elevates it. The third stage, vanaprastha, is a deliberate handing over. You step back from running the world so the next generation can flourish. And you turn toward reflection and guidance, the life of the spirit. And the fourth stage, sannyasa, and I hope my Indian friends will forgive me for any mispronunciations of important words. But sannyasa is considered the summit of the entire journey. The years when a human being is finally free to pursue wisdom itself. Think about it again. Think about it through the eyes within your culture, wherever that is in the world. In that tradition, in Hindu tradition, retirement isn't your demotion. It's your graduation. Or go also in the East, the different part of the East, depending on where you orient yourself. Go to Okinawa in southern Japan, home to some of the most studied elders on earth. The traditional Okinawan language has no word for retirement in our sense. The concept simply didn't exist. Instead, two ideas organize a whole life, which you may know. This is a familiar word to many of us. Ikigai, again, with my pronunciation, my apology in advance, or not in advance anymore. Your reason for getting up in the morning, Ikigai, and the moai, a small circle of friends formed in childhood that supports one another for life. 80, 90 years in the same circle of belonging. Okinawan elders don't retreat from the community as they age. They move toward its center. Ancient Israel, classical India, traditional Japan, three civilizations, oceans apart, arriving at the same verdict. The later years are not the discount rack of human life. Only our young work-worshipping cultures ever thought they were. So let me speak directly to anyone standing at that doorway, at this threshold, or loving someone who is. You are what matters, not your work, no matter how important it is in the world. You separately matter. Your character is what matters. Everything you built in your career can be handed to a successor, but there's something you built alongside it, mostly without noticing. The patience you earned in the years that tested you, the judgment you distilled from 1,000 mistakes, the integrity you kept when it was expensive and difficult, the kindness you practiced until it became a reflex. The rabbis of my tradition taught that there are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, the crown of royalty. But they say the crown of a good name outweighs all of them. Notice what's not on the list: the crown of a job title. Markets crash, titles expire, skills go obsolete, but character doesn't. The character you've developed over 6, 7, 8 decades perhaps is a treasure that never loses its worth. It was never capable of being valuable one day and valueless the next because it was never priced by anyone else in the first place. No one hired it. No one can lay it off. But now I want to show one last piece, because character in a vault is treasure wasted. It only becomes a treasure when it's spent on people. And this is where I want to tell you what I have actually seen. Hillel the woodcutter, remember, left us a command that sounds simple and turns out to be a philosophy of life. Al tifrosh min hatzibur in Hebrew. Do not separate yourself from the community. He didn't say the network. He didn't say keep networking. He didn't say stay busy. He said stay woven in. Keep your life braided into other people's lives. The novelist Toni Morrison, a Nobel laureate, who wrote deep into her 9th decade, put it this way: freedom doesn't mean the absence of responsibilities. Freedom, in her words and her eyes, means you get to choose your responsibilities. For a lifetime, your work chose your responsibilities for you. Retirement is the first moment. They're entirely yours to choose. It's not emptiness, it's freedom, if you know what to do with it. And modern research tells us exactly what to do with it. Harvard's study of adult development, which you might know, is the longest study of human flourishing ever conducted. It, following lives of over 80 years, reached a conclusion its own researchers found almost embarrassingly simple. The single strongest predictor of a long, happy, and healthy life isn't wealth, it isn't comfort, it isn't fame, it's not career achievement. It's the warmth and depth of your relationships. Community isn't a decoration on a good life. It's the load-bearing wall. And I don't need a study because I get to watch this every week, every day. I lead a synagogue community of around 1,000 people. And after nearly 3 decades, actually now fully 3 decades, I can tell you exactly who's the most fulfilled in the community. It's not the wealthiest necessarily. That's irrelevant. It's not the ones who had the biggest careers, again, in this case, irrelevant. It's the ones who show up in other people's lives. It's the ones at the Shiva house. It's the ones driving a stranger to treatment. It's the ones at the bedside, at the Brit Milah ceremony, at the funeral. You know, I did a funeral a few days ago, and there was a couple who showed up who didn't know the mourners and didn't know the deceased. They just knew it was the right thing to do, which was beautiful and touching. That's what it is to show up for one another. at every age, and I mean at every age, the people who are immersed in the most lives. That's the whole secret, and it costs nothing. At any age you are, be involved in other people's lives. Show up. The people who show up for others are the most fulfilled people on planet Earth. And notice showing up requires no job title. No one at the house of a mourner has ever asked the person who brought the food what they used to do for a living. The currency of community is presence. And presence never devalues, which means the good life I'm describing in an episode solely on that, or in this one, is the very thing the whole episode has been searching for. A source of worth that retirement can't touch. So 3 movements, not 3 steps, movements like music. First, change the question. When you meet someone new, especially someone perhaps gray-haired, resist, what do you do? And ask, what have you learned? Ask, what do you love? Ask, who are your people? Watch what opens up. Second, become a Levite. If you're approaching your own retirement or in it, take inventory. Literally write it down. By the way, when I say retirement, we often think only of gray-haired older people. There are people at young ages who are transitioning from one field of work to the next. So it's not just about age, it's about stage. Think about not your position, but your character, the patience, the judgment, the loyalty. Then step back from the carrying and step into the guiding. Somewhere near you is a person straining under weight you once carried. Your decades of scars and skills are exactly what they need. Third movement, show up. Don't separate yourself from the community. Join it, rejoin it, build it, bring the food, make the visit, sit with the mourner, drive the friend, play the game. Choose your responsibilities because for the first time in your life, they're entirely yours to choose. Abraham at 75, Sarah at 90, Moses at 80, Caleb at 85, pointing at a mountain, Benjamin Franklin at 60 with 53% of his pages still unwritten. The oldest stories we have keep telling us the same thing the newest research confirms. Never judge a life still in progress, including your own. You were never your job. You were always the person your job was lucky enough to borrow for years or decades. And that person built slowly, decade by decade, choice by choice, stumble by stumble, and woven into the lives of others. That doesn't retire. That person is just getting started. I'm Rabbi Ron Li-Paz. This is The Meaning Mindset. If you want to leave your thoughts on this, I would appreciate reading them and appreciate reading the conversation that you have.
This season is produced and edited by Jonah Li-Paz. Content editing by Bronwyn Li-Paz. Digital marketing by Notebook Media. The Meaning Mindset is hosted by Rabbi Ron Li-Paz. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.